that's B. So why don't debaters generate enough offense? First reason is they're lazy. They haven't read enough on the topic, so they don't know the major link and internal link arguments. You need to understand what the arguments in the topic are to understand how there are authors that disprove the opposite of each other's points. Debaters also have not thought long and hard about which arguments are weakest on the topic, so they haven't prepared for them, and they're not necessarily in a position where they can beat them because they're not the most informed. The third is they try to apply the same arguments to everything. So arguments like no warrants, non-uniques, problems with the framework, and solvency deficits are over-relied on, instead of specifically trying to engage what your opponent has to say and generate offense there. They're also afraid to commit. They know that developing an offensive argument requires significant investment, and that investment trades off with making more arguments. They come away from refutation lessons thinking that it is better to make more arguments than develop several core offensive arguments. And then they're also afraid to throw down on a few big issues because they prefer to hide in the shadows of a messy, grinded-out defensive battle. In order to be offensive, you need to be willing to commit, spend time, and have the investment pay off. But they are also too top-heavy in refuting the framework and standard. You get so caught up in going straight down the flow and in covering your bases on the framework that you don't have enough specific time to generate offense on their case against their contention. They also think offense is a luxury, not a necessity. They're too comfortable with their case, so they assume there is no need to commit to an offensive strategy against your opponent's case. They are comfortable with a few arguments, so they cross-apply those arguments and then make underdeveloped defensive arguments to supplement their case arguments. They're also spoiled by bad judges who vote on defense and presumption. This is not the norm, and good judges will not vote for you on defense and presumption. Every bad judge that votes on defense or presumption would vote for you sooner and more regularly if you committed to offense. It's not like even these judges prefer defense to offense, they just settle for defense. Then they don't fully understand what makes an argument offensive. Offense is not just a proactive reason to vote for you. Proactive means creating or controlling a situation by causing something to happen, rather than responding to it after it has happened. So you can be the first person to make an argument, but it does not mean that argument is offensive. Reactive means showing a response to a stimulus. These words are meaningless in the context of offense-defense. So what actually is offense? Offense is a reason why your advocacy is better than your opponent's advocacy. An advocacy is something you support. It could be the resolution, a specific plan or form of living wage, etc. Offense is the sum of your impacts. Think of offense as a net benefit to your side. What is uniquely good about your side that is not good about the other side? And comparison is key. Highlight the relevant comparison. If you have an app and the neg says, oh, I'll just defend the world as it is, the status quo, you need to be comparative between the change you propose and keeping things the same. If the negative reads an alternative way of helping the poor, also known as a counterplan, you have to be comparative between your position and their position and show why yours is better. So, section 2, the problems with not generating enough offense. A, you are repetitive because you have to rely on constant cross-applications of your case. Your refutation lacks diversity, which makes it easier for your opponent to group and destroy you in the next speech. You don't leave yourself multiple outs for the last rebuttal, and your opponent can pick out of more arguments since doing so does not represent a harmful concession. When you run defense, your opponent only has to answer it if they're going for the specific argument you responded to. Otherwise, it doesn't matter. It makes their job much easier. B, you get spread out. If you don't make offensive answers, your opponent will, when you're AF, you must generate offense on the NC so that the NR cannot kick the NC and spend 6 minutes destroying the EC, because the NR is twice as long as the 2AR. And when you're neg, you must put as much pressure on the 1AR as possible. Allowing them to extend their case against a defense-only refutation is extremely easy. You also don't have offense to rely on to salvage the round when you don't make offense. C, you lose close debates. It is much more difficult to evaluate debates where both debaters are going for nitty-gritty defensive extensions against one another. The advocacies become less clear. And D, this problem is cyclical. You win lopsided debates on strategies that lack offense just enough that you don't feel the pressure to change your mentality, and you will be stuck in this cycle until you totally change your approach. You need to generate offense. So, why is generating offense so important? A, diversification makes it more difficult for your opponent to cover and answer your arguments responsibly. B, you have more flexibility to go in different directions in the last rebuttal. C, no debate is close if you're going for strong offense. And D, your mentality of attacking your opponent will make you better at everything in debate. You'll use CX more aggressively to set up offensive rebuttals. You will use prep time more efficiently to focus on the weakest parts of your opponent's position. Your refutation will be more positional, meaning that it will just try to disprove individual arguments, but will try to prove why your entire cause, your entire advocacy, is more persuasive. And your crystallization will be more persuasive because offense requires comparison and analysis. Ultimately, this accumulates in you having a stronger presence and making it seem like you're winning because you show that you have confidence in the ability to put them, your opponent, on the defensive. Section 4, how to generate offense. So, A, general tips. You must understand the intricacies of the link chain. You have to isolate each component of the link chain. It's not about the framework and the standard, it's just about the actual offense itself. So just don't get caught up in the top. While some debate on the framework is good, it does not mean that should be the only debate. You need to make sure you have time to go for offense on these. And offensive, you can still have offense under a non-consequentialist framework. Like even if your opponent runs a deontological or a Kantian framework, which is this idea that we look to the intention of the action instead of the ends, you can still make reasons for why the intention is good. So still remember, always try to get offense. B, quick review of the link story. The main link begins with the action of the advocacy and triggers the rest of the chain. So the first link is what the advocacy does, what the app does. The second part is the internal link, which is an intermediate link between two links, or a link and an impact. So if you say, this one thing happens, which causes this other thing, which then results in something else, that other thing is the internal link. To give a specific example, Neg says, living wage harms small business because employers don't have enough money to cover the costs. Small business is key to the economy because we need to grow the economy from the middle out instead of having stagnation. And a strong economy is necessary to promote the general quality of life of people. That middle argument that small business is good for the economy is the internal link. Think of the internal link as a smaller impact that sets up a larger impact. So the smaller impact is harming small business. The larger impact is harming the economy as a whole. Then the terminal impact is the ultimate significance of an argument. So in that example, it would be quality of life because a bad economy has bad quality of life. Some people will go as far to say the terminal impact is extinction. Other people will say it's just a lot of death or just a lot of suffering. It's up to you. Every link story is a chain of causality claims. Okay. C is advanced issues. So this is about the relationship between uniqueness and the link. Who knows what uniqueness is in like a disad? Okay, good. So we'll explain. So a disad is a neg argument basically saying if we do the app, something bad will happen. What it starts with is the uniqueness. This is saying why. This is telling you right now the status quo is some feature. And generally it's saying right now the status quo is doing all right. So status quo doesn't have the problem of the disad. So the reason this is important is that the neg is defending the status quo. Instead of doing a living wage, we keep doing things the way they are. So the neg has to prove that right now the problem the app is about to occur isn't happening right now, so that right now things are better than they would be under the world of the app. The next part of the disad is the link, saying what does the app do to change this? What problem does the app cause? Then the impact is so what? Why is that bad? So to review, the uniqueness is explaining what is the case in the status quo. That means there isn't the problem that's about to be explained by the link. In other words, it sets up why the problem the app causes is unique to doing the app, not to something else. It will not happen if we don't do the app. So to put this in terms of a specific example, let's say the neg runs, the economy is is growing right now. That is your uniqueness. Your link is app decreases jobs. And we know the warrants to the unemployment argument that a living wage means it's too expensive, so you can't cover the costs. Your internal link is jobs sustain the economy, so that we can't have economic growth without having jobs. And then your impact is like the economy collapses, bad stuff. So this is your uniqueness. Now, how do you generate offense against this argument? So, who knows how a turn is supposed to function? A link turn. Yes?
It's supposed to basically say the opposite of it. So if they say the economy is growing now, you can say the economy is actually whatever the opposite of
Yep.
growing.
Yes.
Link turners, and the first thing you say, turn the app actually increases jobs or something that will help you, like, not link into the sample, so maybe that's
Yep. So, exactly. The turn proves the opposite. If they say decreases, you need to say increases. So, if you're responding to this, you say the app increases jobs. But have you generated offense? So, from the way I phrased the question, it's pretty clear that you don't. But why not? What is the first main thing? What is central to offense? Yes?
Don't you have to have a standard that you link into?
Presume that like you're linking into the standard, like it's like some consequential standard. Yes?
You have to say the app increases jobs better.
Yes, you are on the right track. That offense needs to be comparative. So, if you prove the app increases jobs, what is the comparative impact between the app and the neg? Because if the economy is growing now without a living wage, that means that even if the app increases jobs, those jobs aren't necessary to avoid economic collapse, because in the status quo, the economy is growing. In other words, let's say like this is like you have a cup of water. This water is your uniqueness. Like, that's the way things are. The next says the app brings us down to here. That's the app link. And that's that. If the app just answers the disad by saying no, I bring us up to here. So that's the app turn. Does that really matter? Like, you already had a full cup of water. What is the benefit to affirming if the problem didn't need fixing? So, if you're confused, the way you answer this is that the app, in order to generate offense, does not just turn the link, but answers the uniqueness. Instead of saying there's no problem in the status quo, you say there is a problem in the status quo, and only affirming fixes that problem. That makes it a comparative reason to vote for you. So you have to say this is not true. So if I or any of you were answering this disad, the offensive way to answer it would be, on the uniqueness, they're wrong. The economy isn't actually growing right now. It's about to collapse again. We're stuck in recession. It's a big problem. Turn the link, affirming increase of jobs, because employees get more money to buy more products, employers get more money, and then they can hire more people. That means that you show that instead of things being fine in the status quo, there's a problem, and because of that problem, we need the app to fix it. And that shows comparative reason. To go back to the analogy of this cup of water, the app needs to show that instead of having water at the top, we're almost out of water, and affirming is necessary to get us back to a full cup. So, if that made sense, good. If it didn't, just understand that you need to answer uniqueness, say it's wrong, then answer the link with a term in order to generate offense. Okay, so smart turns. This is, so that was section C, advanced issues. Then part D, smart turns. To turn an argument, you must always state the opposite of what your opponent said, and argue that what your opponent said is actually support for your side. Clearly state what type of turn you're making and the specific link, internal link, or impact you are turning. The more precise you are, the harder it is for your opponent to claim that it's non-responsive. The less likely it will be that you label an argument a turn when it's not a turn, and the less likely that you will double turn yourself. We'll explain what that is later. Find the weakest part of the link chain and latch onto it. Make multiple warrants, then warrant your warrants, and read evidence. The smart spread is absolutely terrifying. If you generate a lot of offensive arguments, it's almost impossible for the app to win, because they have to answer every single one. And if they mess up on one, you can extend that as a reason to vote for you. Then, just so you know, if anyone ever uses the term straight turn, that just means you're only making offensive responses, you're not making defensive responses. So, section E, link turns.
Wait.
Yeah.
What do you mean by, in straight turns, you're only doing
So, instead of saying off the app's argument that a living wage increases, or a living wage decreases poverty, you wouldn't go, first, the effect on poverty is indeterminate. Second, it doesn't matter because people will still be poor. Third, turn it, unemployment increases, so more people will be in poverty. Instead, you go, first, turn it, unemployment increases, so more people will be in poverty. Second, turn it, this incentivizes corporations to leave the country that implements the living wage, so everyone is poorer off. And third, turn it for another reason. You only make turns, no not truths or impact limitation. So, section E, link terms. We briefly went over this when talking about uniqueness, but if you missed that or if you just want review, here is it again. This is usually the best, most efficient way to destroy a case, since you can concede so much of the link story and not worry with weighing the impact or internal links. If you win a link turn, you win exclusive access to the terminal impact. The link turn prevents your opponent from accessing the terminal impact. So, in this instance, if you prove that you increase jobs, that you co-opt the arguments that jobs sustain the economy, preventing economic collapse. So, if you beat one link, you take control of the rest of the link story. Whenever the terminal impact is big or obvious, so like if they're talking about economic collapse, terrorism, war, massive death, it's good to go for a link turn and say that they actually have more of that problem than you. Isolate the causal mechanism in the argument and flip the direction of the link. So the cause is whether affirming increases or decreases jobs. You flip it, so you say affirming increased jobs. So here are all the forms of the link term, the argument structure. If they say neg causes y, you say neg prevents y, assuming that y is bad. In other words, something that was a disadvantage is now an advantage because of your response. If they say aft causes y, you say aft prevents y, assuming y is good. And an advantage to their position now becomes a disadvantage to their position. If they say aft decreases y, you say aft increases y, which is assuming y is bad. So again, an advantage to their position becomes a disadvantage. If they say the neg decreases, or if they say the neg increases y, you say the neg decreases y. If they say the aft increases y, you say the aft decreases y. And if they say the neg decreases y, you say the neg increases y. Basically, anytime they use a word, you need to use the opposite word. So, increase, decrease. So, it's the opposite word. If they say increase, you say decrease. If they say cause, you say prevent. Think that. If they say improve, you say worsen, etc., etc. These are also bidirectional, so if they say decrease, you say increase. If they say prevent, you say cause. If they say worsen, you say improve. The key is to use the opposite word, so the argument goes in the other direction. Now, internal link terms. They're also a very effective way to short-circuit your opponent's position. So, if you win an internal link turn, you win exclusive access to the terminal impact. The internal link turn prevents your opponent from accessing the terminal impact, but you must weigh internal links against one another, which requires impact comparison that is unnecessary for the link turn strategy. So, in this instance, instead of saying jobs sustain the economy, you could say like jobs harm the economy. That's like kind of counterintuitive, but you can make the argument. You just have to be internally comparative for the argument. You just have, compare it against jobs sustaining the economy. You can also give a different argument, so like, even if the aft decreases jobs, that causes another harm besides what their internal link says is a benefit. And then we weighed between those. If you aren't prepared for the uniqueness debate, or you don't have warrants for the link turn, and the terminal impact is big, go for an internal link turn. So, basically it's, you show the opposite is true of the second to last part of the argument. So if jobs sustain the economy, you say jobs harm the economy. In this case, it'd be kind of hard to do. Finally, G, impact turns. These are strategic when you're not prepared to debate the link debate, and the counterintuitive nature of your turn will put them on their heels. Lots of critical debaters use impact turns. Go for an impact turn when your opponent's link story stops prematurely. So like if they just say jobs sustain the economy, then as their terminal impact, your impact turn would be jobs improve the economy, or jobs harm the economy, sorry. The argument structure is as follows. If they say the app causes or increases y, and y is good, your argument has to be y is bad. So they're assuming they get something that's good, you prove, yeah, you get it, but it's actually really bad. If they say the app prevents or decreases y, and y is bad, you say y is good. So yeah, they get rid of something, but that something was actually really good, so they should have kept it. You must have evidence and conviction, because sometimes these are outlandish claims. We can go over some of the examples of impacts. One thing that you should do on your own time is try to look at old policy files, you can find these online, or cut your own files that speak to all of these impacts, so that you can always generate offense. So these include things like economic collapse. These include proliferation, nuclear proliferation, so they'll say like the spread of nuclear weapons increases. Another common one is global warming. For some reason, the one side will increase emissions, which increases global warming. There are other environmental ones like biodiversity. So like if you cause a lot of pollution and kill a lot of animals, you create an unstable ecosystem. Trying to think if there are others. There's terrorism. I think those are the main ones. So, and there's also like nuclear war, which is basically like countries get mad at each other, and then they assume that means nuclear war, even though it never does. So if you can find, and this seems counterintuitive, which is why the impact turn isn't great if you can go for a link turn, but if you can find economic collapse is good, you can read that against any disad. And then, instead of solving a problem, they actually prevent a good thing. If you say nuclear proliferation is good, i.e. when a bunch of countries get nuclear weapons, they're afraid to fight each other, so violence decreases. You say global warming is good. It's good if the world gets warmer because that helps crops grow. That's actually an argument, I know. But if you have evidence for it and your evidence is better than your opponent's, you can win the round. If you say biodiversity is bad because when you have too many species in a system, the system becomes unstable and risks collapsing, so ecosystem collapse. This one's absolutely awful, but I think the argument is when terrorism increases, economic transactions also increase, so it's good for the economy. I don't think that's a good argument, but whatever. And then nuclear war. People say that the nuclear war will make the Earth colder and will stop global warming. Yes, I know. Again, these are like last-ditch efforts because they're very counterintuitive, but I do promise you there is evidence that exists for it, and you should have it as an option. Section H, exploiting the double turn. This is a killer strategy, and debaters don't use it often enough. It happens more than you think. A double turn occurs where your opponent makes both a link turn and an impact turn. Does anyone know why that's bad, or what that means? Yes?
Because if they say like, oh, this is bad, and then I increase it, or like they decrease it, then it's offense on your side, because it's like, yeah, it's bad, so I decrease it, so you have less of a bad thing, or you increase it, so you have more of a bad thing.
Yes, exactly. They say both that they have less of a good thing, basically. Instead of, your initial argument is they have more of a bad thing. Their response is, no, I have less of it, and it's good. They're proving the same conclusion of your argument. So, what you have to do when this happens, don't just call it a contradiction, call it an outright double turn, and say, I agree with your two responses. The app can say, I agree, or the neg can say, I agree the app increases jobs, and I agree that jobs are bad for the economy. But the point is, so now the app has just admitted by his own argumentation that he creates a problem because he said he increases jobs and jobs are bad. At that point, the argument's already over. The app has no response because he was the one, or she was the one, who made that response to begin with. So, the argument is to just focus on the conclusions of all of your opponent's arguments, and when you see a double turn, say, extend this turn for him, extend that turn for him or her. These form a double turn, that means I win because. What's the difference, section I, what's the difference between a disadvantage and a turn? The answer is, a disad is an external problem that doesn't flip a link, internal link, or impact in the link chain. They rely on a new link caused by your opponent's advocacy. So, that would be the equivalent of, in response to this argument about app decreasing jobs, the app goes, oh, I solve for poverty. Yes, that's a good thing, but that does not generate offense against, that is an offensive argument, but it is not an offensive response, because it doesn't prove the opposite of the neg's argument. And in terms of theory, this is very quick, but let's say, if you know what theory is, this is very quick. If they say you harm something like ground or predictability, you say either that that's good or that they harm it more. So like, instead of saying you're bad for ground, you say you're good for ground. You just prove the opposite of their argument. It's the same thing as any other debate. Section 5, yes?
Wait, so how do you say you're bad for ground? Like, how does someone prove you can do that?
So like, if they say that they have few arguments to make against their position, you say you would have fewer arguments if I did not agree with this position, for instance. So you are better than them in terms of what you did.
So that would be a zero.
Yes, that would be true. Section 5, drills. There are 3. Force yourself in practice rounds to make 60 to 75% of your arguments offensive. Count how many turns you make versus how many, oh, that's not true, or oh, that doesn't matter type responses you make. B, or 2, whatever. Kick your standard, accept their standard, and straight turn their position. So let's say the neg answers your framework in your case, say, fine, I agree, my framework doesn't matter, their responses don't matter. I'm going to make 3 turns against the negative case for 4 minutes. And 3, sit down and diagram the major link stories and cut evidence back and forth on every potential link, internal link, and impact turn debate. So, take someone's case, use a diagram saying, what does the app cause, what does that cause, what is the impact of that? and keep drawing those arrows, and then find a piece of evidence you could read against each length proving the opposite. Again, in a specific round, you wouldn't be able to do that because you double turn yourself. You should be prepared for anything. The conclusion, then we're going to do a specific drill. Don't be lazy. Don't be top-heavy, and don't be afraid to accept your opponent's standard. Be specific, be precise, and be aggressive. Commit to offense because offense wins championships, and I guarantee you will win more games. Yes?
I have a question about like accepting your opponent's standards. So
Yeah.
if you read your framework and then you just throw it out and accept their framework, like how does the judge know what to do?
You say extend their responses to my framework. They said my framework was false, and I agree with them, so that debate's over. Then they can't do that much because they already said your framework was bad. They can't go on it, so they have to use your opponent's framework.
So then if you agree with them that your framework is bad, then how do you like fight off? How do you generate arguments if you have a baseline?
Because you can still return saying that your side is good for their framework too. Like, let's say you have a framework of minimizing economic inequality, so like we want an equal system, and their criterion is like increasing economic growth. You can say like, fine, it doesn't matter if I increase or decrease inequality. My position still promotes economic growth, so I win. So we are going to do a specific drill where I'm going to read a contention of a case, and you are all going to only make offensive responses. You're not allowed to make defensive responses. So let me get it out. Okay, so I'm going to tell you the criterion, but you're just going to focus on linking your terms to it, not answering the criterion. So his criterion was preserving opportunities for self-realization, which means like enabling people to have the ability to make their own choices, basically. Pursue what they want. Does everyone have paper, by the way? Okay. So I'm just gonna read this case, and you're gonna prove the opposite. I contend that a living wage is not only essential for allowing self-realization, but not giving one is the equivalent of active violations of self-realization. A. A hard day's work makes a living wage a moral desert. Keelkopf, 97. The central theme of the Friedberg Union's discussion was the nature of workers' labor and how it is related to just compensation. Work is far more than a commodity. It represents a personal act of the laborer. People faithful to their work acquire a moral right to wage sufficient to sustain themselves and their family in decency. This links directly to the criterion because the government does not fulfill this moral right, and it does not allow for self-realization.